This week, so last week we did we did dialectical materialism, the crash course, as far as synthesizing a lens of social analysis with how we already understand the world. Now we're going to get closer to the specific realities of the extrajudicial killing of Black people, really Black and brown people. In our first stop, or today's stop, will be the history of this so-called Western Hemisphere. So we're going to see, what this story is actually made of. What this psyche is made of that would be adopted by a white supremacist society. So where we're going to actually begin is in 1688. 1688 is the year of the so-called Glorious Revolution. So the Glorious Revolution, or some know it as the Bloodless Revolution, took place in England, and it was the inauguration of Parliament, and not a shot was fired, not a sword was crossed. What the dream gets sold to us there. Well, that was one of the beginnings of modern democracy. What the Glorious Revolution of 1688 actually inaugurated was the ascension of the bourgeoisie, so that the European bourgeoisie or European capitalist class, English capitalist class, supplanted the monarchy as the primary generator of global hegemony. In 1688 is when the capitalist class started calling the shots. And as a result, what happens then is that slavery goes into hyperdrive. Some of y'all might have seen this that kind of almost like animated illustration of all the where all of the voyages of slave ships are just kind of documented in these dots that are thrown from Africa to the so-called Western Hemisphere. And so it's just like that, and then at a certain point, it just starts flooding. If you look that up, you'll see it's in the 1680s, 1690s, when it really takes off. Why does it take off? Was it because the monarchies were more more moral than capitalists? Than good capitalists in power? No, the difference or a contradiction that we will see come up, or a conflicting objectives will come up over and over, is the conflict between military objectives and economic objectives. So what the monarchies tended to err on the side of was military objective, or what's best for the military reality. So, if one of the early beefs between the plantation owners and the royal the royal apparatus was, well, we want more slaves. We're making a lot of money. We need more slaves. And the crown being like, no, it costs too much to put down your revolts. It costs too much to fight off the indigenous people. It is like, so we can't afford to use our troops to secure your economic interests, right? Well, now that flip-flops. What this kind of like, what this capitalist stage of history is typified by is letting letting economic interests or, you know, interests of exploitation take precedence over what is sane physically, what is physically sane. Okay. So it's at this point that basically the capitalist classes is like, well, we don't care how many revolts have to be put down. We don't care how many wars have to be fought. We're just gonna we're gonna go rabid. Okay. But now what we have to understand though, so you know, it goes slavery goes into hyperdrive. The resulting history, I don't want to say the only history of this I keep saying so-called Western Hemisphere just because it just doesn't you know, how can you divide a circle? You know what I'm saying? But anyway, I mean, I guess you can, but you know, which way is up or which way is to the side? Anyway, so the we could say one of the histories, one of the dominant histories, or the dominant reality that creates the rest of reality, or primary, you know, more principal contradiction or evidence of the principal contradiction, is the history of African slave revolt here. Okay, this is really what drives all, you know, what drove white society, both as far as infrastructure, uh, culture, the birth of whiteness itself, and the main preoccupation of this ruling class. Okay. And what we got to understand too, of what the dangers of this United States things is, it puts us in we think in a frame of like the United States as a self-contained reality that magically manifested out of, you know, whoever's imagination. This manifested out of some founding fathers' imagination, and you know, it took these people and those people and started to do its thing. But the United States, the realities of the United States, the realities of slavery, did not begin in 1776. Okay, and that really all that the United States ruling class, who were, you know, it's funny, they get, you know, they get touted as these great kind of like almost warrior geniuses, you know, business warrior geniuses. It's really they were just slave owners. They were just slave owners in the ruling class that slavery created, and they were just business people. They were actually notoriously bad soldiers. Nobody wanted to use colonial troops when all these wars were taking place between Spain and France and England. Nobody wanted to use them. They were just business people, and in fact, they were pretty conniving. So that, like, you know, they would have British troops fighting for their interests, and then turn around and do backdoor deals with the French. Okay. See, these are not this society is what so-called societies we see, it was not created by genius warriors. It was created by business people who were able to take advantage of uh, 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 global contradictions that had grown to just rabid proportion. Because, but in essence, there was what that period of, you know, what the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s really are an arm race among European empires, in which they try to get as many troops together, as much wealth, and basically broke their teeth on each other. So it's not a coincidence that in 1756 begins the 7 Years' War. That ended in 1763, which basically finally got, you know, Britain finally, you know, defeated Spain and France as the primary controllers of North America. and the Caribbean. But in order to do that, they decimated themselves. And so it's through that vacuum of military power or military supremacy that these business people are able to sneak up, okay, using, of course, the fortunes that they have been amassing, okay. So don't believe me. let's look at these highlights. Here's some highlights of the history of African revolt. African revolt on this side. So we'll start in and these are not even the greatest hits. These are just some hits. Okay, so in 1634 and 1647, there were major plots in Barbados to kill that were discovered by the colonists to kill every last white person on the island. And it should be noted that half of South Carolina, to a certain point, I think the year was somewhere in the early 1700s. Half of the South Carolina population, both European and African, were from Barbados. Okay. Now, why is this, or what is the mainland why is the mainland United States crucial to this planter class, this white planter class? It's crucial because the system of slavery that was in operation, that had that revolved around sugar, and I think I'm trying to blank. I'm trying to think about the statistics, but basically, like, the average English person consumed about 5 pounds of sugar a year. By like in the 1600s, by the 1700s, it was like 35 pounds. So 35 pounds a year, an English person would consume. So this is I mean, the returns on the returns on these operations are in the in the realm of 16, 17, 1800% return on your investment. So they have all of these sugar plantations going, but these sugar plantations, that system was conducive to revolt. Why? Because it featured heavy African majorities, population-wise. Okay, and so you have these situations. So what to preamble these anecdotes. Plantation slavery as it exists in the Caribbean was too hard to keep under control. The African revolt was so severe, and war in between empires was so severe that colonies were constantly in danger of failing. In fact, in the 1730s in Jamaica, there was even like a movement in England to abandon Jamaica. Right? That we should just cut our losses. Well, the white we should cut our losses and just leave and leave it alone. It's not worth it. It's costing too many lives, and it costs too much money to keep it under control. So what did these cats who would become the U.S. rich white people, what did they do? They said, let's move these operations to the mainland where we can do two things. One, with more space, we can create this kind of, we can loosen up the powder keg without being on these hard to police islands, jam-packed. We can use this wide open space on the mainland, and we can do what? We can import a whole gang of white people. Okay. So the significance, again, it's like, what I know we're oriented around the United States, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, blah, blah, blah. But this really is just one history, okay? And this ruling class, they wiggled the nationalism a certain way to benefit their interests. But, you know, again, half of South Carolina literally came up from Barbados, okay? So here we are in 1634. There in 1634, 1647. There were major plots to kill all white people on the island. In the 1650s on Barbados, there were several revolts. 1676, a conspiracy to hit on Christmas Day. And actually, Christmas Day was a popular day, choice of revolt. Throughout the whole Western Sphere, you'll find several revolts that were launched on Christmas Day, you know, because that's the best time to catch them slipping, right? Okay. In 1682, there was a conspiracy in Jamaica. Sorry, there was a conspiracy in Bermuda that involved Jamaicans, so that there was crosstalk between Africans Africans in Jamaica and Bermuda were communicating. All of these conspiracies, of course, resulted in like dozens of Africans put to death. Okay, so we have 1685, 1688, 1692, hundreds executed. All right, there were in 1686, there was a huge revolt on a slave ship. 1695, and also on the African coast, 1695 in outside of Ghana, a huge revolt. In 1709 in Antigua, an African named Sandy almost successfully assassinated the governor. There's a major plot in Virginia in 1709, which inaugurated some of the first illegal gathering laws. Okay. In 1712, there was an uprising in New York. In which Africans set an outhouse on fire and killed the white settlers who came to put out the fire. I think they killed about 9 white people. 70 Africans were arrested, and 21 were executed. And it was rumored that that actually the leader of the conspiracy was brought up from an island in the Caribbean. In South Carolina in 1720, there was a huge plot that involved both African and indigenous people. 1724 in Boston, there was a whole wave of arson perpetrated by Africans. 1729, there was a conspiracy, not just for revolt, but also for guerrilla operations set up in Virginia. 1729, Natchez, Mississippi, Africans and I'm probably gonna say the name wrong, but Chickasaw Native Americans killed 250 white people. See, they don't tell us about any of this, right? We get one, you know, we get Nat Turner, you know what I mean? And that's it. But now that's how we go. That's how we think. If we keep it, the United States, you know, in the United States there was, you know, that's when history began. But we know it's more than that. 1731, a major insurrection in New Orleans on a slave ship. 1730s in Jamaica, the Maroon Wars. again, which led to, you know, like imagine, you know, like I don't know if I'll put it at like a Brexit type of proportion, but a political movement saying we need to get out of Jamaica because these wars were so were going in Africans' favors. And actually in 1738 it resulted in a treaty with the Leeward Maroons, a treaty that was kind of problematic. Um, but they you know, all I had to say, you know, African revolt was a serious factor. 1736 again in Antigua. 1739 you had Stono's revolt in South Carolina. 1740 there was a revolt in Charleston that resulted in 150 Africans being hung. 10 Africans hung a day for 15 days. 1741, there was more arson in New York. 1748, a conspiracy involving Irish and Africans. And there was also fear that indigenous people were also linking with Catholic white people, which we'll get to a little bit in a second. Or should I say, so one of the things that whiteness did is resolve old world European contradictions. So you can come to the United States and be white, not for the privileges of you know, not for the privileges of practicing, you know, whatever you want, like your religion or getting out of some kind of feudalism, but to participate in the U.S. project of slave repression. Okay, and in fact, some argue that the freedom of religion itself was actually was kind of a dog whistle to let Catholics know you can just be white here. Okay. What else do we got here? 1750s, there was a string of poisonings in South Carolina that were famous because the doctors couldn't find an antidote for the poisons. And these poisons also they couldn't find an antidote, and two, they didn't take effect immediately. So you didn't know exactly when someone was poisoned. Okay. In 1748 in South Carolina, there was also an aggressive plot in which Africans actually killed Africans who would not join. So if the plot got ran down to you and you didn't join it, you got killed. Okay. 1753, you have a big uprising in Barbados. In the 1760s in Guyana, there was a Maroon leader named Cuffy who led 2,500 Africans. Okay. I mean, and on and on and on and on and on, right? So what we see is, like, you know, what it gets underemphasized to us, the military reality of the Western Hemisphere, and it gets and within that underemphasis is also the underemphasis of African revolt as a driving, if not the driving factor of history here, one of the most. Okay. And we also see, you know, we have evidence of all of these revolts and conspiracies and plots, and then we also see what the white structural response was. Okay. So for example, in 1675, in Jamaica, and now again, and this is even before we get to the rapid expansion that begun in 1688. We have there's a law, they start a law that says you have to have at least one white servant for every five, no, every 10 African slaves you have. That you can't have an African operation without having some white people on it. Okay. Another interesting thing, I don't know, have we all seen Roots? So you remember, like, on the like slave ship, when he first getting shipped over, everybody's trying to figure out where everybody's from, right? Or who actually speaks my language. And that's kind of part of the, it's part of almost like, liberal mythology, like, and they brought them on, and they got separated on the slave ships. Like, the slave ship was the beginning of the loss of your identity, right? And that's actually not the case. Actually, the plan to mix people up came from this side. It wasn't the concern of the slavers on that pulled people off. That was not on mine. It was because of all of these revolts that the United States planted class then went and said, you can't bring us people all from the same place, because they revolt every time. Okay. There's I think it was, what does that say? There's no date on it, but I believe it's like in the early 1700s in Virginia, they passed a law that said any white person can kill any black person and get away with it if you suspect them of anything. The only thing is you might have to compensate the master depending on what your evidence is. Okay. So it's like, you want to know what this white thing really is. Okay. Again, it's not privilege. It's not privilege, it's deputization. Right. And we have laws also that required patrols. By 1739 in South Carolina, it was law like the militia. So you remember we said, well, the first people with badges were slave catchers. The original militias also were mainly, their main objective was to put down revolt. Again, trust me, nobody wanted to use them. They were not like these militias, right? These colonial militias of lore, that wasn't a thing. Okay. Their main task was putting down revolts, not, fighting the French or something, or fighting, or whatever else, or not even fighting Native American. Those were empire troops doing most of that. And again, that's why there was this conflict in the creation of the United States. There is that growing conflict because Britain is basically tired of doing all the heavy lifting of empire making. Okay. All right. In the early 1700s, there's laws in New York that any black person or indigenous person over the age of 14 has to hold a candle at night while walking. And any citizen could do anything to enforce that, and had to enforce it actually with whatever means you had. In 1735, the United States itself actually changed in that Georgia became a free state in 1735. Now, Georgia became a free state in 1735 because they needed a white buffer state to stand between South Carolina and Florida. Florida being a hotbed of African and indigenous united armies, as armed by Spain. Okay. some even argue that the creation of the North itself was not just about the United States, not just about the United States economically developing in a rapid enough way to where it could start taking care of its banking and insuring, which is basically what those original North processes were: banking and insuring and shipping, right? But it was also about they had to create a society away from the powder keg. And anytime you have repression, that's what you have. All right. So, what is whiteness? So the first time, what whiteness is whiteness the ideological the ideological result of a society that has to perpetually suppress African revolt. Period. The first recorded use of the word white was 1661. And can anybody guess when it became when it blew up? When they stopped calling, before that it was they say Christians or free people. When white became when did white become common speech? In the 1690s. Again, back to this rapid expansion of slavery. So again, this is a military situation. All right. Any questions? Bacon's Rebellion. Well, Bacon's Rebellion is actually is a little is not as straightforward. Because that's a revolt in which, right, white and black people were supposed to have unified, right? But I believe let's see here. Right. It was an event that hardened Indian as race category. Yes. It basically accelerated indigenous extermination, or it was the kind of like a popular white expression of that desire to increase indigenous extermination. So let's pick up the let's pick up the pen and answer the first question in the in the We Charge Genocide curriculum. What is the United States? What is the United States as an idea? What is the United States as an objective? And just take take a few minutes and whatever you can synthesize. We'll say 5. All right, let's start wrapping it up. I know that's not a whole lot of time to sketch, but you can freestyle off of what freestyle off of what you jotted down. Um, I did want to answer though that the question I saw up there. What why was chattel slavery a sound business idea? I mean, well, not number one, it like again, there's the profit returns. I don't think there's been anything like that in history, in economic history, the money you can make. But what surplus value is, um, as related in the response is basically the reality that what a dollar actually is, that every dollar is really just uh, the result of somebody being underpaid. Okay, so we'll take a sweatshop example. If you have you have somebody working in a sweatshop making shoes, and they make shoes for uh, you know, so we'll say $1 a day. Um, what this means is if the capitalist who owns the shoe company, or when the capitalist who owns the shoe company sells one pair of shoes, let's say for $100, they therefore can reproduce that worker for 100 days. Okay. So what this means is that every pair of shoes that that worker makes after that first pair of shoes for the next 100 days is free money for the capitalist. That's what surplus value is. All right. And that's actually the true that's what wealth is actually uh, generated by. Okay. So now that's a sweatshop worker, but how much does how much does a slave get paid? Nothing. Okay, so what slavery in essence is surplus value on fucking steroids, right? Which is just nothing but free money. So in a way, it's beyond. It's in essence it's what created it's what created the wealth that's now been flipped over and over as productive forces develop. So I don't even know if there's a word like, lucrative wouldn't even, it's free money. It's turning, what is it? Hay into gold, or whatever fucking magic is. It's alchemy, right? it's not, it's not even. It's fucking. It's magic, man. Uh, and produced, and again, produced the wealth of the world. So does anybody want to share their thoughts on what what you wrote, or even if you don't want to read what you wrote, just have a thought. Now is the time, unless you are a Zoom bomber. Okay, just wait till the end. Let's have our discussion first, and then at the end you can fucking do what you got to do. Do what you come to do. But anybody want to share their thought? Mm-hmm. Don't all speak it.
Word. I can go. I wrote that to me, the United States has always been a neo-colony where domination is used to enforce slavery and later wage slavery onto colonized people, a place where murder of colonized people is legal, a place where settlers do not know they are settlers, place where settlers believe that they are on their own land and that the colonized people are the ones that are trespassing. The United States is a mytho ideology, which means basically like there's this myth that settlers don't exist, and that is reinforced by that person adopting that as a worldview. So everyone else that doesn't look like them, who doesn't own land, who doesn't own, you know, the means of production, is necessarily like an invader that they must kill.
Mm-hmm. Other ideas?
I think what stood out to me in what you said was that this is, in contrast to other imperial states in the past, the United States is a project where the owning class is really put at great pains to conceal their weakness. And so the tricks to conceal that weakness are aesthetic ones. So this idea of Georgia as a buffer, I mean, that kind of blew my mind, because that means that gerrymandering and these kinds of shell game, you know, spatial disorganization tricks have been baked into how the United States has always worked, as a way to do the laziest thing possible to get labor out of people.
And do the right and do the cheapest thing.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, you also see, you know, what does I don't know, did we talk about the military benefits of deindustrialization in the United States? So, you know, so some people say yes, that globalization, you know, basically taking all of the real physical production out of the United States and putting it in countries where they can get away with extracting even more surplus value, right? Like, yes, that is part of this, that is part of the evolution. But just as strong a generator, if not the primary generator of the strategy of taking production outside the United States, was was a response to the radicalization of Black, brown, you know, people of color, and poor white people in the 60s. So that once we proved that we would burn cities down, and once we also started displaying a more pronounced internationalism, the ruling class said we can't have our vulnerability. We can't have our vulnerability so easily accessed, right? I think we did. We talked about why in classic Marxism the working class is supposed to be is the vanguard of the revolution. Part of it being their proximity to the fragility of the ruling class's superstructure. So let's take all of these, you know, let's take all of these factories outside of the United States and outside of the clutch of this growing militancy. But now what's interesting though, where could they not do that? Where could they not deindustrialize? What could they not deindustrialize? They couldn't deindustrialize tech, right? That has to stay here because of its, you know, really because of its military application. You know, tech is not just about making us more kind of like more manic consumers. It's also all of these ramifications of surveillance, right? Financial, facilitating financial processes and all this, right? So this can't go, so it has to stay here. Well, what then do you do? Move the descendants of the militants out. And so you see, where I'm at in San Francisco, we didn't stand a chance. There was no way they was gonna let us stick around here, right? When I think it was you know, that's like 90%. 33% of all international venture capital was going into the Bay Area by the 90s. Okay, so you're not going. You can't have this kind of crown jewel anywhere near the hands of people who revolt, right? What are and some other thoughts? To be spoken. I see the chat. I see the chat blinging. But let us talk.
For the folks who don't know, this is going on YouTube. So if you wanna reach infamy, you gotta speak up because they can't see the chat. They can't see your genius ideas.
I just noted that it was created as a satellite office, just thinking of it in business terms, to manage production of goods, create some separation from the English, and fuel that desire for wealth and domination.
And oh, my bad. Real quick, I got you in 2 seconds. And it should also be noted that the feeling actually in Europe, there was always this discussion of are the colonies worth it? And in fact, there was a big sentiment that it wasn't, until slavery went into high gear. You know, almost, you know, slavery saved the colonial effort. And then, you know, rapidly expanded it. What were you going to say, Matthew?
Yeah, I wrote that the U.S. is an idea birth for economic expansion. It has never been seen as a land already occupied. It has become a home for capitalism, built on the back of exploitation and genocide. It is constantly reshifting its ways and maintaining an upper hand. It is a place where whiteness is given the role of deputization, a place that has exacerbated the idea of whiteness. It is an imperialist, a colonizer, and a murderer.
Other thoughts?
I wrote, hello, everyone. I wrote, you know, it's a colonial project to steal resources, and then peoples to engage each other, and then, you know, the land in this production of goods and services that produce the wealth through the means of slavery or indentured servitude. That then is, you know, goes to the ruling class, and that the state, beyond like a mainland territory, so, you know, with Puerto Rico or different places, or just generally other places in the world that has gone through U.S. occupation or whatever, but that the state and white or colonial people, and beyond that as well, but people who, by lack of education or whatever reasons, are also engaging in toxic systems of violence. So like beyond racial violence or through racial violence extending to other realms. That those people in that state would either be doing, would be getting, or would be protected in projects of land theft, murder, rape, kidnapping, assault, sexual violence, incarceration, slavery, environmental destruction, as a network of systems and tools and apparatus that maintain that process and that system and recreate itself.
I guess too, I would add, it's a cause and effect of Enlightenment philosophies, the ideology of the country, in terms of they needed something to rationalize their behavior and also protect European expansion. So sort of like it's Enlightenment as shaping our modern imagination in this country in terms of morality and the pseudo-mythologies that Nicholas talked about.
I have a question for Tongo. Hi everyone. My question is, what role do you think that Haiti plays in the modern capitalist environment that we find ourselves in? I mean, because we really don't talk enough about that revolt, and I wonder if they're not being allowed to participate in a lot of the developments that have happened in the last 50, 60 years, or probably since the Haitian Revolution, really. I just wonder if they're being made an example for a particular type of behavior that's not really allowed in this hemisphere at this time. Can you expand a little bit on that?
I mean, I'm in a super underqualified way, but so Haiti from the has been blockaded, robbed, extorted from the time their revolution survived. And definitely was foremost on white imperialist minds is what are the potentials here, and also one of the reasons why they knew that slavery itself was on borrowed time. That eventually that a slave society cannot sustain itself, and definitely inevitably a revolt crashes it. But I'm speaking now as far as like in these times that we kind of like the formation of whiteness and capitalist interests are taking place. Yep.
So I just wanted to get back to my question. This is Ash. And so I totally get the concept about, the surplus, the profit. But I'm specifically, and let me just say, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm particularly concerned about this issue because it affects me today. I literally have to go to ancestry.com to try and find my people, where I'm from, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just wondering, why was chattel slavery, necessary as a business idea? Like the idea that I'm going to take your name, the idea that you will be a item, an object, no different from a cow or a dog. How is that conducive to your business? And if it's just to suppress revolt, it's hard for me to accept that, but I will accept that if that is the case. But it just seems like, wow, you had to do all of that, because if I'm the slave owner, I want a good inventory. I want to know exactly who I own, where they're from. So if they do go missing or run off, I'm gonna be able to say, from the Ubuntu tribe, she was yay tall, So it just seems like it was so extra. You know what I mean? It was just like Google. Look how big Google is today. Would Google say, okay, when you join us, forget your last name because in the interest of business, we need you to forget everything. You know what I'm saying? It just seems like, why? Thank you.
So, well, really, I think really that also we had to investigate what's going on in Europe before before slave trade even takes off. And it's interesting too. There's so the one of the arguments is that white people became white people in a generation. That there was this growing, that actually there was a natural unity between indentured servants and black people and just by manipulate being manipulated by a couple laws that because your indentured servitude ended in 7 years, then all of a sudden they became the troops of lynch mobs, which just doesn't make doesn't make any sense, right? So something definitely is going on in something in the mass imagination of Europeans, which requires materialist investigation, had made them ideal troops to carry out this white supremacist reality of hyper violence, though. But now, as far as trying to get into because there was a few things to address in your point. So one thing to keep in mind is that entire empires were at stake. Power, not just so empires were at stake, and these capitalists, as they were asserting themselves against monarchies, was a manic reality. Okay, and so if your mission is to become more powerful than a king, or if your mission is to make sure that the Spanish Empire doesn't take your island away from you, you're not going to get into the nuances coming up with a more ideal more ideal or a more nuanced way of dealing with controlling Africa. That's going to be broad strokes. If they get out of line, kill them. Okay. Money is moving so fast. Power is changing hands. I mean, these islands in the Caribbean were, 1 year it'd be in the hands of the British. The next year it'd be in New York itself. New York belonged to how many? I think three, 4 different, maybe 3 empires kept changing hands. So power is moving fast. Money is, these operations are making so much money. They were not concerned with kind of like more almost like nuanced sociological methods. All they needed Africans to know is that you will get killed or maimed. So, but now when we talk about, again, like, so violence against Africans, as though which actually grows beyond their control, though, right? So it's not, so even with all that death and with all that torture, there were still, however many revolts, right? Several hundreds, dozens, thousands, right? And revolts, conspiracies that almost sunk the whole ship every time. So what did they do? Well, we have to. What do we have to import now? We've imported all these Africans. We got to import white people. And when these white people get here, they have to be our buffer class. They have to be our security force. They have to be our police. And if you look at so like what exactly is it to say that any white person can kill any black person? You might have to pay the slave master. You might have to compensate them depending on what's going on, but you can absolutely kill and should kill any African that you see doing anything suspicious. What does that do? It makes every white person really just a personal extension of the slave state. Or what we see today, a personal extension of the police state, because what's the running joke? All these white people calling the cops, right? Like, what is it really to be? To be white is to provide targets and execute targets if you have the capability. So it's like it's a sociological phenomenon that mass repression, mass exploitation, or violent extraction of surplus value requires. And that's why the system there will always be problems, because this is basically starting from a situation of white of a white ruling class perpetually biting off more than it can chew, and really held hostage.
But do you think they know that they're biting it off too much in the beginning? Do you think they see that and they like, fuck it, we'll make it up later, or they literally don't know?
I think they don't. I think a lot of them didn't care. I mean, or just, you know, and just like, you know, I mean, so Freire argued that a slaveocracy doesn't even have in it the ingredients to become a democracy, because it's a situation of absolute power, and people just don't give it up. So even if some of these plantation owners, again, they were just business people, they didn't come in with absolute power. But this is the reality that has produced them. They are taking their cues from monarchies. They're taking their culture from monarchies. You know, they weren't just, you know, again, like the United States didn't just come from a vacuum. Yeah, the slaveocracy quote comes from Freire. I think it's in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Somewhere early in the book, actually, I believe. Well, I'm sorry, I felt like there was a second part to it. Was there something else in your question, Ash?
Nah, you covered it. Thank you.
All right. So and now on there, and they're aware. So what you know, I guess in conclusion of where we'll pick up next week. So in the United States begins, right? When one of the things Africans were referred to as the intestinal enemy. We were the intestinal enemy of the United States. And in fact, Benjamin Franklin, let me see, what did he say? Every slave might be reckoned a domestic enemy. That's what Benjamin Franklin said. Okay, and he said it when they were trying to deliberate this so-called independence from England, and that's the context of the quote. But now so domestic enemy, domestic terrorist, what has changed? Right. So this is, and so begins so begins Black life in 1776. right? And this is and just as sure, just as sure as the U.S. bourgeoisie brought their evolved feudalism into their practice, the modern ruling class has brought the same processes and cultures into policing practices that we'll get to next week. So, you know, the end.
Word. So we can end it right now, or we can continue on if y'all have any more questions or want to have a conversation further.
You have one more question. How convenient is that? Like, so you're saying that the move from commodity to enemy is just instant. It's never a phase where our efforts are acknowledged, like, you know, thanks for building all of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, how the hell did we become enemies so fast when we just gave y'all all this work? My bad.
Well, you know, you see that it's so what whiteness therefore is a permanent Africans being the permanent enemy. There is a permanent enemy, or indigenous people being a permanent enemy. You think about it. When has the United States not had an enemy? One of the so We Charge Genocide again is a riff off of the We Charge Genocide book that was the indictment that that Paul Robeson and other cats brought to the United Nations, charging the United States with genocide against Black people, right? And it was just like all of these, just this person got lynched, and this person got lynched, and this person got lynched, and this person got lynched. And you know what else was added into that indictment? This person got killed by the police, this person got killed by the police, and this person got killed by the police, right? That's the majority. Actually, the majority of the indictment reads almost like the Operation Ghetto Storm study. Just here's example after example after example. One of their almost moral pleas to the was right, yes, and the lack of health care as well, and the housing, food, right. But one of the pleas of the in the preamble was that a genocidal a country that has genocidal practices domestically inevitably has them they become foreign. And this kind of perpetual militarization, it's almost like reciprocal breathing for a society. So this again, I mean, if you look at a hyper militarized society, the concept is like, do you think, I guess another question would be like, do white people in the United States, do enough white people in the United States actually even think they have a country if they don't have a war going on at all times? There's always an invading horde, and we'll look at some phenomena too. There's always an enemy at the gates. There's always some kind of demon or devil, or there's always something that can only be destroyed. There's always something that cannot be tamed, just destroyed.
Okay, well, I just want to add one more thing, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say, y'all. So if there was 1,600 plus major plots going on, which I literally didn't know about, so thank you. Do you think there are 1,600 major plots against mass incarceration right now?
I do not.
How can that be? Thank you.
Well, I think So here's the thing about the development of a society, right? Another reason why you know a society of oppression evolves or diversifies so aggressively and ceremonially, you know, and likes to point your attention to all the various facets of government and social institution, is because a repressive society has to outgrow the familiarity of the people it is oppressing. So over time, not only were there these hundreds of revolts, but these revolts and conspiracies also got more and more, really more and more effective, more and more complex. So, you know, you might start off with like, okay, let's just burn this plantation down, you know, or you know, kill this operation right here. But then all of a sudden, cats start trying to, then Africans start trying to assassinate governors, right? Or then you have a conspiracy in which Africans on 2 different islands are communicating. Or we see in the Denmark Vesey conspiracy in South Carolina, the objective is to take the state of South Carolina, right? So the more the longer you have us held down, the more familiar we become with you, the more effective our strategy and the more realistic our strategies will be for revolt. So how does the system adjust? It creates more and more and more processes so that we don't know exactly where the enemy is or who the enemy is or what's the most effective way of doing anything. There's a good book called An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution. And it's this cat named Charles, I think his last name is Beard, B-E-A-R-D, I believe, Charles Beard. And so one thing that so he breaks down basically like what all the 4 major ways that they made money, and how this, you know, and how this the new how the new federal structure protected these interests, right? And one of his assertions is that the point of checks and balances in 3 branches of government is to diffuse tensions or spontaneous uprising by not having a castle for you to storm. If it's all in one castle, this is our rulers are in there, then we can storm it, right? But if it's like, well, okay, we have a problem. You have a problem. Okay, you have a problem with this mayor, go to your governor. You got a problem with the governor, go to the feds. You got a problem with the president, go to the Congress. You got a problem with the Congress, maybe the Supreme Court is cool. You got it's like all of these basically bells and whistles are all of these little what the hell spouse? What does the steam come out of? On a factory, what do you call that thing that the steam? You understand what I'm saying? That you have all these branches and functions of government just to keep our resistance unfocused, right? So now you have a point where you know what I mean, like the bureaucratization of everything. I mean, you know, this society as it exists now is almost gaseous. Like, where does anything really exist? Where is the seat of power? Who are the seat of power? That's why we run around here with all these metaphysical concepts, right? Like we should not, as related by what we talked about last week. It's almost maddening. It's almost maddening, the prospect of having to say, that's our enemy right there, and this is how we get to them. It might drive you crazy.